September 1938, Detroit, Michigan. The black Mercedes sedan carrying German military observers rolled through the gates of the Ford River Rouge Complex, the largest integrated factory on Earth. Oberst Georg Thomas, chief of the Wehrmacht's War Economy and Armaments Office, stepped onto American soil with a mission that would haunt him for the rest of his life: to assess whether Germany could win an industrial war against the United States. What he witnessed over the following 3 weeks would force him to write reports so alarming that some Nazi officials would accuse him of defeatism and treason. The numbers were staggering, almost incomprehensible to minds trained in European industrial scales. River Rouge alone employed 93,000 workers and consumed its own electrical power, equivalent to a city of 500,000 people. The facility took in raw materials at one end, iron ore and coal and sand, and produced finished automobiles at the other, 1,500 vehicles rolling off assembly lines every single day. Thomas walked through buildings so vast that supervisors used bicycles to traverse their length. He watched production lines where a new car frame emerged every 49 seconds, precision so exact that workers could assemble components without custom fitting or hand adjustment. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The German delegation included representatives from across the Wehrmacht's technical branches. General Major Wilhelm von Lieb brought expertise in artillery production. Kapitän zur See Karl Dönitz sent subordinates to examine shipbuilding capabilities. Every branch of Germany's armed forces needed to understand American industrial capacity because rumors had reached Berlin suggesting production scales that simply could not be true, numbers so large they seemed like propaganda or calculation errors. Thomas had been skeptical before arriving. German intelligence estimated that American claims about production capacity were exaggerated, perhaps doubled or tripled for political effect. The United States had a reputation for commercial excess and wasteful abundance, but surely their industrial statistics reflected inefficiency rather than genuine capability. Surely no nation could actually produce goods at the scales Americans claimed. The first day at River Rouge shattered those comfortable assumptions. Thomas watched a foundry pour molten iron into molds at a rate that exceeded the entire daily output of many German factories. He observed stamping presses that shaped steel body panels so quickly that the eye could barely follow individual operations. He witnessed paint shops where workers sprayed finishes using techniques German factories had never mastered, achieving in minutes what German craftsmen required hours to accomplish through hand application. The automotive assembly line particularly transfixed the German observers. Henry Ford had perfected this manufacturing philosophy decades earlier, but seeing it operating at full capacity revealed implications that went far beyond building cars. Workers specialized in single, repetitive tasks, each person performing the same operation hundreds of times per shift. Components arrived at workstations in precise sequences, timed to the second. Quality control happened continuously throughout the process, rather than through final inspection of completed products. The entire system minimized wasted motion, wasted time, and wasted materials. German factories still relied heavily on skilled craftsmen who built products from start to finish, each worker responsible for multiple complex operations requiring years of training. This guild approach produced excellent quality but limited production speed and made factories dependent on irreplaceable skilled workers. The American system made every worker replaceable within days of basic training, eliminating the bottleneck of specialized knowledge. A new employee could learn their specific task quickly and perform it adequately, while the overall system maintained quality through process control rather than individual expertise. Thomas requested detailed production statistics from Ford management. They provided the numbers willingly, even proudly, seeing no reason to conceal information from foreign visitors. River Rouge produced 800,000 vehicles annually, more than the entire German automotive industry combined. The United States manufactured 4.5 million vehicles per year across all manufacturers, a figure that included cars, trucks, and buses, but excluded military equipment. Germany's total annual vehicle production reached approximately 300,000 units, roughly 1/15 of American output. The implications for military production were obvious and terrifying. These same factories, these same workers, these same production lines could be converted to manufacture tanks, aircraft, weapons, and ammunition on scales Germany could never match. The machine tools that stamped automotive body panels could stamp armor plate. The assembly lines that built car engines could build aircraft engines. The workers who installed civilian vehicle components could install military equipment using identical techniques and training. Ford's Willow Run facility, still under construction during the German visit, was being designed to manufacture B-24 Liberator bombers using automotive mass production principles. The building would eventually become the largest room in the world by floor area, covering 67 acres under a single roof. Ford expected to produce one complete four-engine heavy bomber every 63 minutes once the facility reached full operational capacity. Thomas examined the architectural plans and recognized that this wasn't boastful speculation, but realistic projection based on proven manufacturing methods. German aircraft production relied on specialized, skilled workers building planes almost individually, each bomber requiring thousands of man-hours of expert labor. The Luftwaffe produced perhaps 20 to 30 bombers per month from major facilities, numbers that German planners considered satisfactory given available resources and trained personnel. American plans called for producing more heavy bombers in a single day than Germany manufactured in a month, and doing so while simultaneously producing fighters, transports, and trainers in comparable quantities. The delegation traveled next to Pittsburgh, where they toured steel mills operating on scales that dwarfed anything in Europe. The Carnegie, Illinois Steel Corporation's Homestead Works stretched along the Monongahela River for miles, its blast furnaces producing steel at rates Thomas found difficult to believe even while watching it happen. American steel production reached 28 million tons annually, compared to Germany's 19 million tons. This gap seemed manageable until Thomas recognized that American production was operating below capacity due to peacetime economic conditions. The facilities and workforce existed to double or triple output if military necessity demanded it. German steel production operated at maximum sustainable capacity, with no ability to expand significantly without years of investment in new facilities and training additional workers. American steel mills could increase production 30 to 40% simply by adding shifts and running equipment continuously. Beyond that, the United States had mothballed facilities from the Great Depression that could be reactivated within months. Germany had no such reserve capacity, no industrial cushion to draw upon in emergency. The aluminum industry presented even more alarming disparities. Aluminum production required enormous quantities of electrical power, making it economically viable only in regions with cheap hydroelectric capacity. The United States had developed massive hydroelectric facilities at Niagara Falls, in the Tennessee Valley, and across the Pacific Northwest, specifically to power aluminum smelting. American aluminum production capacity exceeded 400,000 tons annually, nearly 10 times German production. This gap directly limited German aircraft production since modern planes required aluminum airframes, and Germany simply could not produce enough raw material to manufacture aircraft at American scales. Thomas visited the Boeing facility in Seattle, where workers assembled B-17 Flying Fortress bombers using techniques borrowed from automotive manufacturing. The production line moved partially completed aircraft through sequential workstations, where teams installed specific components or systems. The process wasn't as refined as automotive assembly, and bombers still required far more hand-fitting and custom work than cars, but Boeing was systematically eliminating custom operations and replacing them with standardized processes using interchangeable parts. German observers noted that American aircraft used thousands of standardized fasteners, rivets and bolts and screws, manufactured to precise specifications, allowing any unit to fit any hole without adjustment. German aircraft still used many custom-fitted fasteners, each one requiring skilled workers to drill holes and shape fasteners to achieve proper fit. This seemingly minor difference, multiplied across thousands of attachment points, meant American aircraft required dramatically fewer man-hours to assemble than German planes of comparable complexity. The electrical equipment industry revealed another crushing disparity. General Electric's massive facilities in Schenectady, New York, produced electric motors, generators, transformers, and control equipment in quantities that exceeded the entire European electrical manufacturing industry combined. These components were essential for modern industrial production, and American manufacturers could supply them in virtually unlimited quantities, while German industry struggled to obtain sufficient electrical equipment for existing facilities, let alone for expansion. Thomas toured the Wright Aeronautical Facility in New Jersey, where workers manufactured aircraft engines using precision machine tools and assembly techniques that emphasized interchangeable parts and minimal hand-fitting. Wright produced thousands of engines annually, each one built to specifications so exact that any engine could be installed in any aircraft without modification. German aircraft engines still required significant custom fitting during installation, with mechanics adjusting and modifying components to achieve proper function in each specific airframe. The machine tool industry formed the foundation of all industrial production, and here American superiority reached its peak. Machine tools, the equipment that manufactured other equipment, determined how quickly any industry could expand production. The United States manufactured more machine tools than all European nations combined, and American machine tools incorporated sophistication and precision that German equipment rarely matched. Firms like Cincinnati Milling Machine Company, Brown & Sharp, and Pratt & Whitney Tool Company produced equipment that allowed rapid setup for new production runs, quick changeover between different parts, and reliable precision requiring minimal skilled operation. German machine tools generally required skilled operators with years of training to achieve acceptable precision and efficiency. American machine tools were designed so that workers with minimal training could produce acceptable parts by following straightforward procedures. This design philosophy, sometimes dismissed by German engineers as evidence of American technological inferiority, actually represented sophisticated understanding of industrial reality. Making machines easier to operate allowed production to scale far beyond the limits of available skilled workers. The delegation visited Bethlehem steel shipyards, where workers constructed merchant vessels and warships using welding techniques that eliminated thousands of rivets and dramatically reduced construction time. American shipyards were beginning to implement assembly line techniques for ship construction, prefabricating entire sections of hull in workshops and then assembling them rapidly at the shipway. Liberty ships, the standardized cargo vessels designed for rapid mass production, would eventually be built at rates approaching 3 ships per day across all American shipyards. Each Liberty ship required more steel than 300 tanks, yet American industry would produce them by the thousands, while simultaneously building warships, aircraft, tanks, trucks, and every other weapon type. Thomas compiled his observations into detailed reports that circulated through Wehrmacht leadership and the Reich Armaments ministry. His conclusions were unambiguous and deeply disturbing to German strategic planning. The United States possessed industrial capacity exceeding Germany's by a factor of at least 10 to 1, and potentially 20 to 1, in categories like aluminum, machine tools, and shipbuilding. American industry operated below capacity during peacetime conditions and could expand production by 3 to 5 times if mobilized for total war. German industry already operated at near maximum sustainable output, with minimal ability to expand without years of investment. Most critically, American industrial advantages were structural and insurmountable through German effort. The United States had developed its industrial base over decades through competitive commercial markets that rewarded efficiency and production scale. Germany's industrial development had been distorted by state direction, autarky policies that prevented efficient specialization, and military priorities that emphasized small-batch production of complex weapons rather than mass production of simpler but adequate equipment. Catching up wasn't a matter of working harder or investing more resources. It would require decades of structural economic transformation that Germany could not accomplish while fighting a major war. The reports reached Hitler's desk in October 1938, just as the Führer celebrated his diplomatic triumph at Munich and prepared for further territorial expansion. Thomas was summoned to a meeting where he presented his findings to Hitler and the military leadership. The presentation did not go well. Hitler rejected the conclusions as defeatist and accused Thomas of being intimidated by American propaganda. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe and responsible for the four-year plan economic program, dismissed the reports as exaggerated and insisted that German industrial quality more than compensated for American quantity. Thomas attempted to explain that quality advantages meant nothing if the quantitative disparity reached factors of 10 or 20 to 1. Superior German tanks or aircraft couldn't alter strategic outcomes when America could produce 50 tanks for every German tank, or 100 aircraft for every German aircraft. Mathematics weren't subject to interpretation or wishful thinking. If Germany initiated a war that brought American industrial power against it, Germany would lose through simple arithmetic regardless of tactical prowess or technological sophistication. The military leadership split in their reactions. Some officers, particularly those in logistics and supply branches, recognized the validity of Thomas's analysis and shared his concerns. Others, particularly field commanders who emphasized tactical capabilities and fighting spirit, considered the warnings irrelevant. Wars were won through superior doctrine, leadership, and soldier quality, not through industrial production statistics. Germany had proven in World War I that inferior industrial capacity could be offset through military excellence and efficient mobilization. Thomas pointed out that Germany had lost World War I precisely because inferior industrial capacity had eventually overwhelmed military excellence, but this observation was not well received. Hitler had built the Nazi movement partly on the narrative that Germany lost World War I through betrayal rather than military defeat, and suggesting that industrial weakness had determined that outcome contradicted party doctrine. The meeting ended with Hitler dismissing the reports and ordering Thomas to focus on maximizing German armaments production rather than measuring American capacity. Additional German technical delegations visited the United States through late 1938 and early 1939, each one returning with observations that reinforced Thomas's conclusions. Luftwaffe observers reported that American aircraft engine production capacity exceeded German capacity by factors of 15 to 20. Artillery experts noted that American companies like DuPont could produce more explosives in a single month than German chemical industry produced annually. Naval observers calculated that American shipbuilding capacity could construct an entire German navy's worth of tonnage in less than 6 months. Every delegation, every report, every analysis reached identical conclusions. American industrial capacity was so vastly superior to German capacity that military conflict between the two nations would result in certain German defeat once American production reached full mobilization. The only uncertainty was how long mobilization would require, with estimates ranging from 18 months to 3 years. Even taking the most optimistic assessment, Germany could not win a short war before American production overwhelmed German forces, and Germany certainly could not sustain a long war against an opponent with 20 times its industrial capacity. These warnings influenced some German strategic thinking in subtle ways. The decision to avoid directly provoking American entry into the war reflected recognition that bringing American power against Germany would be catastrophic. Hitler's declaration of war on the United States in December 1941, following Pearl Harbor, has been called one of history's greatest strategic blunders, partly because it activated the industrial nightmare that Thomas and others had documented. German military planning emphasized quick, decisive victories that would achieve objectives before enemy industrial advantages could be mobilized, reflecting implicit acknowledgement that sustained conflict would favor industrially superior opponents. But fundamentally, the warnings failed to alter German behavior in meaningful ways. Hitler pursued territorial expansion and military aggression, despite knowing it would eventually trigger conflict with industrially superior powers. The Nazi leadership convinced themselves that German advantages in military preparedness, tactical doctrine, and ideological motivation would overcome material disadvantages. They believed that modern warfare was decided by swift armored thrusts and air superiority in the war's opening stages, not by industrial production measured in years-long struggles. Thomas continued pressing his warnings through 1939 and into 1940. After Germany's invasion of Poland and the beginning of war with Britain and France, he circulated updated assessments showing that Germany's strategic position was deteriorating. Britain's blockade prevented Germany from accessing critical raw materials available only through overseas trade. Soviet supplies provided temporary relief but depended on Stalin's continued cooperation, something Thomas considered unreliable over the long term. American neutrality was clearly temporary, with President Roosevelt's administration obviously sympathetic to Britain and France. The fall of France in June 1940 temporarily silenced Thomas's critics. Germany's stunning victory seemed to prove that tactical excellence and operational brilliance could overcome material disadvantages. Goering mocked Thomas publicly, pointing out that German forces had defeated a coalition with superior industrial capacity through superior military quality. The prophets of industrial determinism had been proven wrong, and Germany's future looked bright, with most of continental Europe under its control. Thomas responded with detailed analysis showing that France's defeat had resulted from superior German operational execution during a brief campaign, not from sustainable military-industrial advantage. Germany had achieved victory by concentrating forces decisively at key points and exploiting French command failures, tactical successes that could not be replicated indefinitely against all opponents. The fundamental industrial balance remained unchanged and would ultimately determine the war's outcome once it evolved into sustained attritional struggle rather than brief, decisive campaigns. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 represented Germany's last chance to avoid the industrial reckoning Thomas had predicted. Operation Barbarossa aimed to destroy Soviet military power before winter, capturing resources and industrial capacity that might offset American advantages if war with the United States became inevitable. The plan required complete victory within 5 months, defeating the Red Army and occupying Soviet industrial regions before harsh weather halted operations. Thomas watched the invasion's progress with mounting dread. Initial German advances were spectacular, with panzer divisions racing hundreds of kilometers into Soviet territory and encircling entire Soviet armies. But the campaign failed to achieve decisive victory in the required timeframe. Soviet resistance stiffened as Germans pushed deeper into Russian territory. Supply lines stretched beyond sustainable limits. Equipment broke down from constant use across enormous distances. Winter arrived with German forces exhausted, undersupplied, and still facing intact Soviet armies defending Moscow. The failure of Barbarossa activated exactly the scenario Thomas had warned about. Germany now faced sustained multi-front war against opponents with combined industrial capacity that dwarfed German resources. Britain controlled the seas and received increasing American support through Lend-Lease. The Soviet Union, despite catastrophic early losses, retained industrial capacity in the Urals beyond German reach, and was beginning to receive American supplies through Arctic convoys and Persian Gulf routes. American entry into the war, following Pearl Harbor in December 1941, completed Germany's encirclement by powers whose combined industrial output exceeded German capacity by factors so large that conventional arithmetic seemed inadequate to express the disparity. Thomas prepared updated assessments documenting Germany's deteriorating position. Soviet industrial evacuation had preserved much of their manufacturing capacity, relocating entire factories eastward beyond German bomber range. American production mobilization was accelerating faster than initial estimates projected, with automobile plants converting to aircraft and tank production ahead of schedule. British industrial recovery, supported by American supplies and freed from immediate invasion threat, was increasing armaments output despite strategic bombing campaigns against German cities, achieving minimal industrial disruption. The German armaments industry, despite propaganda claims of miraculous production increases, struggled with fundamental limitations that American observers had identified years earlier. Skilled worker shortages prevented production expansion, as experienced workers were conscripted for military service and replaced by foreign laborers with minimal training. Machine tool shortages, limited ability to establish new production lines, and Germany could not manufacture machine tools quickly enough to expand capacity significantly. Raw material shortages, particularly of metals requiring overseas sources, constrained production even when factories and workers were available. American industrial mobilization demonstrated exactly the capabilities Thomas had witnessed in 1938. Automobile factories converted to military production with remarkable speed, applying mass production techniques to weapons manufacture. The Ford Willow Run plant began producing B-24 Liberator bombers in 1942, gradually increasing output until reaching peak production of one complete bomber every 63 minutes in 1944. A single American factory produced more heavy bombers monthly than the entire German aircraft industry. Tank production revealed similar disparities. American factories manufactured 49,000 Sherman tanks during the war, more than total German production of all tank types combined. Soviet factories, using American machine tools and raw materials received through Lend-Lease, produced over 50,000 34 medium tanks. Germany manufactured approximately 25,000 tanks of all types through the entire war, a figure that included tank destroyers and assault guns to inflate the total. The quantitative advantage Allied industrial capacity provided simply overwhelmed German tactical excellence and technological sophistication. Aircraft production gaps were even more extreme. American factories produced nearly 300,000 aircraft of all types during the war, including almost 100,000 fighters, 35,000 heavy bombers, and 98,000 trainers. Soviet production exceeded 100,000 aircraft, despite catastrophic early losses. British production reached over 100,000 aircraft. Germany manufactured approximately 100,000 aircraft total, facing combined Allied production exceeding 5-to-1 numerical superiority. The ammunition and explosives disparity demonstrated how thoroughly industrial capacity determined sustained military operations. American chemical plants produced explosives in quantities that allowed artillery bombardments German forces could never match. Single Allied artillery barrages consumed more shells than German factories produced in weeks. American bombers dropped more explosive tonnage on Germany in individual raids than the Luftwaffe delivered to Britain during the entire Blitz. The mathematical reality of industrial warfare meant that German forces faced opponents who could expend ammunition almost without limit, while German units carefully rationed every shell. Thomas documented these realities in reports that circulated through increasingly pessimistic Wehrmacht leadership. By 1943, even the most optimistic German commanders recognized that material superiority had become decisive. The Battle of Kursk in July 1943 demonstrated that Soviet industrial recovery had reached the point where Red Army could absorb German offensive operations and counterattack successfully through sheer material advantage. German forces achieved tactical successes but could not break through. Defensive positions reinforced faster than attacks could eliminate them. The Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944 revealed industrial advantages so overwhelming that German tactical responses proved futile. Allied naval supremacy meant invasion forces received continuous supply across the English Channel, while German defenders struggled with shortages of fuel, ammunition, and replacement equipment. Allied air superiority prevented German daylight movement and disrupted supply lines, forcing Germans to transport supplies at night using horse-drawn wagons. American artillery fired shells in quantities German commanders considered wasteful, but which allowed infantry to advance with minimal casualties behind walls of exploding steel. German forces fought skillfully with inferior resources, achieving defensive successes through tactical excellence and superior training. But excellence could not overcome 10-to-1 material disadvantages. For every German tank destroyed in combat, Allied forces could field 3 replacements. For every German aircraft shot down, 5 more appeared. For every German soldier killed, Allied armies had trained replacements ready to deploy. Germany's finest soldiers, best equipment, and most skilled commanders could not alter mathematical realities Thomas had documented 6 years earlier. The strategic bombing campaign demonstrated American industrial power through its sheer scale and persistence. By 1944, American bombers attacked German targets in formations of 500 to 1,000 aircraft, dropping thousands of tons of explosives in single raids. These massive raids occurred almost daily, sometimes with multiple formations attacking different targets simultaneously. The 8th Air Force alone, operating from Britain, eventually fielded more heavy bombers than total German bomber production throughout the entire war. Each raid consumed resources, fuel, bombs, and aircraft, in quantities that would have bankrupted German logistics, yet Americans sustained this effort continuously, while simultaneously supporting ground forces, naval operations, and lending equipment to allies. German industrial production peaked in mid-1944 despite Allied bombing, a testament to desperate efficiency, improvements, and ruthless exploitation of occupied territories and slave labor. But even maximum German production achieved less than 1/5 of incard. Allied output, insufficient to replace combat losses or build reserves needed for sustained operations. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments and War Production, performed miracles of organization extracting maximum output from diminishing resources. But miracles could not overcome arithmetic. Germany simply lacked the industrial foundation to compete with opponents whose combined production exceeded German capacity by factors approaching 20-to-1. Thomas watched Germany's military position deteriorate through 1944 with the grim satisfaction of a prophet whose warnings had been ignored, but whose predictions proved accurate. He had documented American industrial superiority in 1938 with precise detail. He had warned that war with the United States would result in certain defeat through overwhelming material advantage. He had calculated that American mobilization would require 18 to 36 months, but would then produce weapons at rates Germany could never match. Every prediction had materialized exactly as forecast, and Germany was paying the price for leadership's refusal to accept uncomfortable realities. The final year of the war became an exercise in delaying inevitable defeat. German forces fought desperately, inflicting casualties and holding positions with diminishing resources, but could not alter strategic outcomes determined by industrial mathematics. Soviet forces advanced from the east, with equipment supplied by factories operating in the Urals and with American trucks, radios, and raw materials enabling mobility German forces no longer possessed. Allied forces advanced from the west with seemingly unlimited supplies of fuel, ammunition, and replacement equipment that German defenders could only dream of possessing. Thomas survived the war and testified at Nuremberg about economic planning and armaments production. His warnings about American industrial superiority, documented in reports from 1938 through 1945, became part of the historical record explaining Germany's defeat. Prosecutors used his assessments to demonstrate that German leadership had understood the impossibility of winning a sustained war against industrial superior opponents, but had pursued aggressive policies anyway, gambling that quick victories would achieve objectives before material advantages became decisive. The industrial disparity Thomas had documented influenced post-war strategic thinking about military power and economic capacity. Cold War military planning emphasized that sustainable military forces required industrial foundations capable of producing equipment at scales matching potential opponents. Nuclear weapons temporarily seemed to obviate industrial capacity as a determining factor, But conventional force planning continued to recognize that sustained military operations required industrial support systems developed over decades through civilian economic activity. The lessons Thomas learned during his 1938 visit to American factories shaped West German economic policy during Reconstruction. German industry rebuilt after World War II with conscious attention to efficiency, standardization, and production scalability that had characterized American industry. The Wirtschaftswunder, Germany's economic miracle of the 1950s and 60s, reflected systematic application of industrial principles German engineers had observed in America but had failed to implement before the war. Modern German industry emphasizes exactly the qualities Thomas had noted in American factories: interchangeable parts, minimal skilled labor requirements, rapid production, scalability, and robust supply chains. The story of Georg Thomas and the 1938 German technical delegation represents one of history's clearest examples of strategic warning ignored with catastrophic consequences. Thomas provided German leadership with accurate assessment of American industrial superiority, documented with extensive evidence and precise calculations. He explained clearly that war with the United States would result in certain German defeat once American production reached full mobilization. He warned repeatedly through 6 years that material disadvantages would prove decisive regardless of tactical excellence or technological innovation. German leadership rejected these warnings because accepting them would have required abandoning aggressive expansion policies central to Nazi ideology. Hitler and his inner circle convinced themselves that willpower, ideological commitment, and tactical brilliance could overcome material disadvantages. They believed that modern warfare would be decided through swift, decisive campaigns rather than sustained industrial struggles. They assumed that Germany's prepared military forces would achieve quick victories before opponents could mobilize their latent industrial advantages. These assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. World War II became exactly the sustained industrial struggle Thomas had predicted, and Allied victory resulted precisely from the overwhelming material superiority he had documented. Germany's tactical excellence, technological innovation, and soldier quality proved insufficient to overcome industrial disadvantages reaching factors of 10 to 20 to 1. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Opponents who could produce 5 tanks for every German tank, 3 aircraft for every German aircraft, and 10 artillery shells for every German shell would eventually prevail, regardless of qualitative differences in equipment or personnel. The human cost of ignoring Thomas's warnings exceeded 50 million dead worldwide, including 6 million murdered in the Holocaust, 27 million Soviet citizens, 6 million Poles, and hundreds of thousands from every nation touched by the war. German cities lay in ruins, destroyed by bombing campaigns made possible through American industrial capacity to build thousands of heavy bombers and supply them with unlimited fuel and bombs. German industry was shattered, its factories demolished, its workforce scattered, its technical knowledge appropriated by victorious powers. The German nation was divided, occupied, and stripped of sovereignty for decades. All of this might have been avoided if German leadership had accepted Thomas's analysis in 1938 and recognized that aggressive expansion would inevitably trigger conflict with industrially superior powers that Germany could not defeat. The warnings were clear, detailed, and accurate. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. The conclusions were mathematically certain and strategically sound. Yet the warnings were ignored because they conflicted with ideological commitments and strategic ambitions that German leadership was unwilling to abandon. Thomas's story reminds us that accurate intelligence and sound analysis mean nothing without leadership willing to accept uncomfortable truths and adjust policies accordingly. It demonstrates that ideological commitment and wishful thinking cannot overcome material realities, no matter how inconvenient those realities may be. It proves that military excellence and tactical skill, while valuable, cannot compensate for fundamental disadvantages in industrial capacity when conflicts evolve into sustained struggles of material production. Most importantly, It shows that the price of ignoring expert warnings can be measured in millions of lives and decades of suffering. The factories Thomas toured in 1938, the production lines he measured, the capacity he documented, all of it eventually turned toward destroying the nation he served. The automobiles became tanks, the civilian aircraft became bombers, the machine tools became weapons manufacturers. The workers who built consumer goods built instruments of war with the same efficient precision Thomas had observed and reported. Everything he had warned about materialized with mathematical precision, and Germany paid the price for refusing to believe that arithmetic could determine strategic outcomes. Standing in the ruins of Berlin in May 1945, Thomas might have reflected that being proven right brought no satisfaction when the cost of vindication was measured in millions dead and a nation destroyed. His warnings could have prevented the catastrophe if anyone with authority had possessed the courage to accept what the evidence clearly demonstrated. Instead, ideology trumped analysis, wishful thinking overcame calculation, and ambition ignored arithmetic until reality imposed its lessons through total defeat and unconditional surrender. The factories that had impressed him so deeply in 1938 had delivered exactly the crushing superiority he had predicted, and the nation that rejected his warnings ceased to exist as he had known it. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.